Hey guys, Easy Bisky here. I know it's been a while, but I don't have enough time to do anything that I want to do these days, so videos are gonna be a while. That being said, I do have 2 more video ideas ready, so I may be able to get those out soon. So without further ado, here's my review of the Super Nintendo era of Final Fantasy games. So first off, how am I ranking them? I'm keeping the same categories from last time. The best at each category gets the most points. The worst only gets 0. Why 0? Well, we're dealing with 4 games this time. But wait, you may say, there are only 3 Final Fantasy games on the Super Nintendo. And you're right, but as a base metric, I'm throwing in Final Fantasy III from the Nintendo Entertainment System. Since we're dealing with 3 SNES games, the maximum points for each round is 3, which means the best score a game can get is 30. Secondly, where can you get these games? With the Pixel remasters out, I believe that all of them are available on iOS, Steam, and Android. But there are other versions of the games that you should be aware of. For these rankings, I'm only going to be covering the original SNES release, or if it was never released in America, a fan translation of the Super Famicom version. But here are all the versions available. Final Fantasy IV has been released on Super Famicom, SNES, MSX2, WonderSwan Color, PlayStation, Game Boy Advanced, DS, and PlayStation Portable, in addition to iOS, Steam, and Android. In my opinion, the Pixel Remaster is the best version of the game. If you would like me to cover why, let me know in the comments. Final Fantasy V has been released on Super Famicom, PlayStation, Game Boy Advanced, Wii Virtual Console, and PlayStation Network in addition to iOS, Steam, and Android. Once again, I think that the Pixel Remaster is the best version, but if you want me to cover why, tell me in the comments. Final Fantasy VI has been released on Super Famicom, Super Nintendo, PlayStation, Game Boy Advanced, Wii Virtual Console, and PlayStation, in addition to iOS, Steam, and Android. Quite frankly, I think that the original, PlayStation, and Pixel Remaster versions are all great choices. It depends on which glitches you do or don't want, and which improvements you want. Back to ranking the game. What are the categories again? Music, story, graphics, gameplay, magic balance, battle balance, convenience, enjoyability, importance, and polish. First, music. It shouldn't be too surprising that the music continued to get better as the series went on. The series composer Nobuo Uematsu took the Super Famicom to its limits time and time again in order to make the music as amazing as possible. This, combined with the Super Famicom sound upgrade, makes these games' music sound good even today. It's time for the battle theme test. Final Fantasy VI gets first place, Final Fantasy V gets second, and Final Fantasy IV gets third. Final Fantasy III doesn't even compare, and does not place. Scores are, once again, at the side of the screen. Next, story. During this era of gaming, story was everything. During the height of the console wars, the only way to make a console and its games stand out was with something creative. Story and gameplay were the primary ways this was achieved. This time, the Super Nintendo era of Final Fantasy games ditched the Star Wars-esque backstory monologue and instead threw you into the action with cutscenes that grab your attention. Here, watch. While both Final Fantasy IV and VI have thrilling stories full of love, adventure, and more, 6 wins out by a landslide in my opinion. On the other hand, 5's story doesn't hold up well. However, 5 still gets third because 3's story is even more nonsensical. As of now, 6 seems to have a strong early lead, with 4 and 5 tied for second. Coming up, graphics. Graphics happen to be in a similar vein as music. They got better as the games progressed, especially in the realm of character animation. As such, Final Fantasy VI gets first, Final Fantasy V gets second, and Final Fantasy IV gets third. I'm starting to wonder why I bothered throwing in Final Fantasy III. Now we move on to the gameplay as a whole. The increased power of the Super Famicom let these games have a new gameplay style first introduced in Final Fantasy IV, the active time battle system. Now you can battle your foes in real-ish time. Not only does this make battles a little more challenging, but also spices up combat significantly. The series would go on to use this for some time. Final Fantasy IV was also the first game to have more than 4 party members, though you couldn't choose who went in your party. Final Fantasy IV is also the only game in the series, to my knowledge, to let you have 5 people in your party at once. In addition, benefiting from the active time battle system, enemies and bosses could counterattack. Though Final Fantasy IV might have overused it, the future games in the series wouldn't utilize it as much. Magic was changed to be gained at set levels instead of purchasing it, and most importantly, Final Fantasy IV introduced mid-dungeon save points. Final Fantasy V did away with a lot of the things from Final Fantasy IV, and instead feels like a remake of Final Fantasy III. Jobs are now able to be leveled up, granting more abilities. Final Fantasy V also introduced accessories for characters. Final Fantasy VI went back to the style of gameplay that IV had used, only it improved upon it tenfold. Final Fantasy VI let you swap between its numerous party members, and summons got revamped. But there's more here than simply discussing what was added. Other than new gameplay options, Final Fantasy IV offers nothing in the way of customizing your party. Everything is controlled by the story. Final Fantasy V is a game based around its character customization, with there being near infinite ability and job combinations. But 6 takes the cake with its plethora of unique characters that you can further build by being in control of what magic they learn and what stats grow through espers. Final Fantasy VI gets first here, Final Fantasy V gets second, and Final Fantasy IV gets third. Once again, 3 does not place. Next, we head into the nitty-gritty, magic balance. Due to Final Fantasy IV's story-driven nature, magic is learned at set intervals, and it is used with a pool of magic points, like in 2. This let the developers fine-tune the balance of magic, and as a result, it was very balanced. Final Fantasy V goes back to requiring magic be purchased before it can be used, but it is now purchased for the entire party and never needs to be bought again. Summons were a little weak in this game, and it suffered from too much useful magic, in my opinion. The introduction of spell blades, time magic, and blue magic were all welcome and useful, but balancing them with the already expansive summons, white and black magic, isn't possible. And, at times, it can feel as though the game is requiring you to use them all. For the majority of Final Fantasy VI, the magic is balanced, but the ability to teach any character the best magic in the game means that you can vaporize enemies in a matter of seconds. Esper summons were also fairly weak. Final Fantasy IV gets first, Final Fantasy V fixed all the main issues from 3, so it gets second. Final Fantasy III is more balanced than 6 in my opinion, so it gets its first point in third place. It appears that Final Fantasy VI's lead may be coming to an end. In a similar vein, let's talk about how balanced the battles are. Once again, Final Fantasy IV controls everything for the sake of story. As a result, you never have to grind, and you can play through the game at whatever pace you want. Each character's abilities are fairly straightforward. Final Fantasy V was a roller coaster of difficulty. Some parts felt too easy, and others had bosses that were overpowered except for some random weakness that you had to find. As long as you have your party set up right, the final boss is a fair challenge. But otherwise, you won't stand a chance. In Final Fantasy VI, the characters all have unique abilities again, but not all of them are as useful as others. But they're all more balanced than 3. The order here is 4 first, 6 second, 5 third, and 3 dead last. After falling behind 5 for a while, 4 has finally passed it and is now rocketing towards 6's precious first place. We're getting to the end, but there's still time for anyone except 3 to win this. It's time to push these games to their limit and talk about how convenient they are. With the introduction of large storage spaces for items and mid-dungeon save points, the SNES era games are far more convenient than their predecessors could have ever hoped to be. And while I may have had trouble figuring out where to go in 6, they've both got fun quirks and whatnot that makes up for it. As a result, they all tie for first, and we'll just forget that I was ranking 3. How much did I actually enjoy playing them, though? Final Fantasy IV is nostalgic for me because I grew up with it. Its simplicity and relatively short playthrough time make it a classic and a blast to play. Final Fantasy V's job system is really hard to understand the scope of on a first playthrough. In addition, there's no real reward for exploring the final dungeon or fighting its 2 super bosses. I'm sure I would love it on a second playthrough, but for now I can't say I really enjoyed it as much as the other two. Final Fantasy VI was always my favorite growing up, even if I never really played it, but after beating it, I can say it is still my favorite. The beautiful story makes up for any frustrations I had while playing through, and the ability to turn characters into whoever you want is a lot of fun. Final Fantasy VI just edges out over 4, and 5 gets third. Next, I'll discuss how important these games were to the series and industry as a whole. Final Fantasy IV introduced the active time battle system, which would go on to be used not only in future Final Fantasy games, but also in one of the best JRPGs of all time, Chrono Trigger. It was also the first Final Fantasy game to really have a gripping story. Different colored chocobos were also introduced, though I'm not sure how much these were used outside of this game. Final Fantasy V was the first game to use kanji in the text, which is cool if you live in Japan, I think. I wouldn't know. 5 also introduced such memorable characters into the series, such as Gogo and Gilgamesh. The game's job system would later be used in a variety of Final Fantasy spin-off series. Several concepts that never made it into 5 would go on to be used in 6. Unfortunately, 5 never got released here in the States because we weren't ready for it. Or something. Final Fantasy VI is the first Final Fantasy game to claim being 3D. While not fully 3D, it used the SNES's Mode 7 to great effect. It also boasts the largest cast of playable characters in the series. However, none of these things really impacted the series going forward, as Final Fantasy VI still boasts the largest cast, and the next game in the series was on a console that was fully 3D. While it may have cemented the fact that audiences could handle darker themes, 2 and 4 already had proven this to some extent. While Final Fantasy VI is a monument to that era of JRPGs, it stands somewhat separate from the direction the future games would go. Because Final Fantasy IV reformatted a lot of the important ideas from the first 3 games, I say it gets first. Because Final Fantasy III was so influential to the series as a whole, it gets second. 5 gets third, and in a shocking twist, 6 doesn't place this time. And now it's time for our last category. How polished are these games? Well, 4 and 5 have a handful of bugs and glitches, with 4 seeming slightly more polished than 5. 6 is a completely different story. Final Fantasy VI has bugs and glitches causing everything from broken status effects to insta-killing bosses to total save data corruption. 4 takes first, 5 a close second, and 3 a close third. 6 isn't even close. So our final scoring is Final Fantasy IV with 22 points, Final Fantasy VI with 20 points, and Final Fantasy V with 17 points, and Final Fantasy III with a grand total of 4 points. That means Final Fantasy IV is our winner! Wait, that can't be right. Can it? How did my favorite lose? Well, I guess it just goes to show that all the SNES era Final Fantasy games are pretty great. But the real question is whether I like Chrono Trigger more than 6. Oh well, I'll answer that another day. Remember, I was only ranking the original versions of these games. Many of the remakes fix a lot of these issues. Let me know if you have any more categories you think I could use to rank them in the comments. Would you have ranked them differently? Let me know. Anyway, that's all for now. I'll see you guys in a week, hopefully. But knowing me, I'll not get that video out for another 2 months. Anyway, that's all for now. Easy Bisky out.